I'm excited to welcome our next speaker for the day, Alex Gray. Well, Alex is the current head of science at Dubai British School. Having worked in Dubai for past 6 years prior to arriving in Dubai, Alex was the head of biology and prestigious grammar school in North Birmingham, in which he played a key role in medical and Oxybridge applications. You may know Alex from his online persona of Deep Teaching, where he addresses ways which teachers can develop, engage, explore and progress through EdTech. Let's go ahead and welcome Alex on board.
Hi there, and thank you ever so much for joining me for today's conversation. My name is Alex Gray, and I'm the head of science at Dubai British School in Dubai. What I want to talk to you about today is why we should be coaching teachers. And to address this to start with, I want to kind of talk about what most people perceive coaching to be. So when we ask people, and especially in terms of teachers or in terms of students and people in workplaces, to think of coaches, they automatically think of sports coaches. For example, Jurgen Klopp, who you see on the screen. And when they then start to dive deeper into coaches and sports coaches, they think of it as just someone who comes up with training for teams or training for individual athletes. And on the other side, you have people who are non-sports based and they think of maybe their music instructors or someone who helps them with their singing or their acting. And it kind of gives a false representation of, one, what coaching is in terms of a school sense and executive sense, but also stops us and makes us query about, well, what is it in for us and how can we use it successfully to promote deeper and better teaching and learning? So why do we need to do it? And this is the problem we face at this moment in time. The rapid and constant disruptive change in what is the new norm. We've seen that from COVID-19 and we're still facing these challenges today. And what worked previously and what our senior leaders and managers used to do in the past no longer does. So we want that kind of clearer guide in terms of how we can succeed and be successful in the future. So what I want to talk to you about first is kind of trying to unpack coaching, but more in a sense of what coaching isn't. So what you can see on the screen there is there's 4 things that coaching isn't. As coaches, if we're trying to build this into our teachers' continuing professional development, the first thing is coaches are not consultants. Coaches don't tell people what to do. You know, they are guides and catalysts for growth and maximizing performance. At the same time, coaches aren't trainers or teachers. You know, when it comes to teaching, teachers therefore operate in a giving or delivery mode. There is an input, and students operate in kind of that taking and learning in terms of they take on board the output, and coaching isn't about that. Here's one of the biggest things, and I'm going to address it as well as we move forward, is that coaches aren't necessarily mentors. And that's one of the biggest sort of misunderstandings that we seem to have, especially in schools, and leaders talk about, oh, we should be coaching and mentoring. Mentors often share, this is how I did it. And they're there to sort of impart knowledge and experience, often from an older generation down to a younger generation. And the last thing that coaches aren't is they're not therapists, they're not counselors. You know, therapy is about diagnosing or healing or addressing some form of trauma and dealing with personal psychology. You know, in terms of therapy and counseling, it operates below the level, and coaching is to do with being above the level. So just to address sort of the main issues we often see regarding mentoring and the assumption that, well, coaching and mentoring are the same thing. Mentoring, as it says, is coming from this Greek word mentor, which, as it says, means an experienced or trusted advisor. In this case, an advisor for a younger person. And we often see that in schools, whether it's new members of staff who start, or in case we have training teachers, NQTs, and we will assign mentors, someone who has experience, someone who understands systems, you know, in terms of planning, in terms of marking, and someone they can go to when it comes to, right, how am I going to deliver this type of lesson? So as it says, the role of the mentor involves a more experienced guide, and the benefit of the mentor is great experience and expertise. And again, so those are things that coaching isn't. Okay, so there is a requirement for it. So what is our solution? So at the heart of coaching is the idea of maximizing the potential of people. And there is evidence to support this in terms of the International Coaching Federation 2016, that 80% of people who received coaching reported an increase in confidence. In terms of well-being, there was a study, a meta-analysis done by Thieboom in 2014 that found there was a positive impact on effect on the coachee's well-being. And then thirdly, the type of resilience, a study by Grant in 2009 that coaching groups reported greater resilience and confidence in responding to change. And at this moment in time, with the current climate we live in as teachers, and this rapid change that we're seeing in terms of what was once the new norm, and now coming back into schools where we're at this, the working hours of almost coming back to normal, and the technology and the expectation from parents and students, there's a huge change, there's a huge shift that's taking place. And to be having those three things, the confidence, the teacher well-being, and resilience there, is going to allow teachers to maximize what is teaching and learning, and have the skill sets to cope with these changes and better to support students coming through their classrooms. So one of the questions and the purpose of this is why coach? Now, some data taken from the US in terms of their Department of Labor found that the number one reason that people leave their jobs is because they don't feel appreciated at work. And moreover, it says the organizational research finds that the employee experience hinges on the employee's experience of their manager. And there is that phrase in terms of that people don't leave their companies, they leave their bosses. And for us in education, we often come across that in terms of the middle leaders or the senior leaders. And that's the challenge in terms of the why we should coach and how we bring this in, is that if you've got a leader, be it a middle leader, a senior leader, in this case, a manager that has good or effective coaching skills, the impact they have is vast on this idea of being transformative and being able to bring out the best and insert what we call change in terms of changing for better. And there was a quote in terms of talking about what perfection is. And I think it was from maybe even Churchill, but something about the idea of that perfection is about being able to change again and again. And so the perfectionist is someone who is constantly changing, and not saying that teachers should search for perfection, but the notion of change and changing for better is one that is really important and probably more at the forefront today than what it has been for a while. We've all had those experiences of teachers who've been there for long periods of time and potentially at the same school for a long period of time and find themselves stuck in the same habits, in the same ruts, as it were. And whether it's unable to change or scared of change or unwillingness to change, those are the types of things where actually coaching can be very supportive and transformational to achieve that on a small level or on a bigger level. And the purpose of it, like it says, is about maximizing performance, retention, and unlocking talent so people can maximize their own potential. There is a phrase, a saying, or in terms of this BBOS, and it's used a lot at this moment in time about best version of self. And that's what coaching, the purpose of coaching is to unlock that and maximize potential in people so that they can be the best versions themselves. And for teachers, obviously that best version is about the impact and the effect they can have on the students. So a lot of this is to do with teaching and learning. Now, one of the biggest questions that comes into this is, well, how do I start? Where do I start? So I'm hoping we kind of address this idea of, what coaching isn't, but also the idea of what coaching is and the evidence that's there to support it in terms of, our teachers' well-being, our teachers' confidence, and our teachers' resilience. So how to start? Now, in terms of what this isn't going to be, it's not necessarily going to be me being able to sit here and say, right, these are the types of things in terms of developing a coach, becoming a coach. This is to do with, as a school whole, how do we start in terms of moving this forward so that we can bring in a culture of coaching and see if we've got something that's already started in school? Are there certain leaders, middle leaders, or teachers who work collaboratively to actually do this? So there are 6 areas to address with this. And I just need to read through my notes as I go a little bit through it as well. So the first one there is about supporting coaching. Now, that's more in terms of the question is to do with ways in which coaching is currently contextualized in the school CPD strategy. More often than not in schools, support and coaching isn't something that's built into CPD. It's not strategically planned out. And I would say, if we're wanting to get to that point, if you're in a school or a team, as it were, that wants to do that, you need to review that. Is it actually ingrained? Is it built into our CPD? Is it part of our school strategy, rather than something that's kind of ad hoc? So when you look at it, it might be sort of, are the benefits of coaching established with a senior leadership team? Is there a clear and rationale coaching for, why we're going to coach and why do we want to do it? What's going to be the impact? What do we want to gain from it? Is there an intention that coaching is aligned with strategies for CPD? Okay, so in terms of being aligned with performance management or school improvement. So that's the idea of looking at supporting coaching. So does it take place in our school? Is it built into our CPD? The second one is about participation in coaching. So that looks at patterns and participation across sort of the teaching community of the school. So do you have middle leaders? Do you have, let's say, departments that kind of already do these things? Do you have senior leaders that are interested, skilled, equipped, and want to do it or do it naturally? But the key thing for it is about participation brings opportunity. So if you're doing a review of this before you get started, is there an opportunity for coaching or engaging conversations to actually take place? That's one of the key things we're seeing here in terms of having opportunities to do it. Teachers, we know, are busy people. And in terms of the time, it's important that if we are going to move this forward, that we're given time to do it and to do it successfully. The third point talks about the intended purpose of coaching. So as we've said, it's about identifying sort of those areas about where do we want it to have a great impact. Generally, it is to do with teaching and learning. Okay, so you're asking those questions, sort of, if there is coaching for teaching and learning, what's it being used for? Do any of the purposes identified above dominate in your school? So is there an overarching key theme, a message that kind of dominates your CPD or the drive to deliver the coaching side of it? So are you happy about the current scenario? So if you're reviewing, and want to embed this, sort of, you need to have a clarity on sort of the purpose of coaching. Most people's are to, as I say, develop teaching and learning in school to maximize the teacher's performance. So it's really a case of breaking that down a bit further into the how and the why. That's the purpose. The next one on there is to do with practical arrangements. Now, as we kind of already addressed a little bit with this, that focuses a lot on time. So in terms of coaching conversations or coaching episodes, they organized in your school? And if so, in terms of helping to determine alternative approaches. So are there other ways to actually go about this in terms of creating opportunities, the time, so that teachers are having this opportunity to go through it like that. Number 5 then talks about experiences of coaching. So again, when you're there and you're doing your review, we've established that you may have people like myself, who's a middle leader, who's a qualified coach, who's someone who's interested in further fields of it. You may have other teachers who have experience from other schools. You may have senior leaders who have done it as part of a master's or some form of MPQ qualification. So, it's interesting to therefore ask, who's interested in this. It's also interesting to actually ask the staff cohort if they perceive it's going to be beneficial. A lot of the research suggests that in terms of the effectiveness of coaching is if people are willing and ready to be coached. And that's in terms of actually thinking that people want to change or want to be better at certain things. And that's the key thing for coaching, and how it differs from mentoring that we talked about previously, is that when you do coaching, it is the person who's receiving it who drives that, and it's about their wants and their requirements, not about the coaches. So, the person being coached or the coachee is driving this. So it's interesting to see if any of the colleagues have experience, have actually done any small courses, read up on anything, or have this interest or intention to be involved in it. And lastly, what we see there is plans for coaching. So in terms of addressing it, it's the way in terms of how is it going to be delivered, in terms of systematically planning it for your school, for the CPD, and as we said, strategically building it into. So, does coaching appear in the school development plan is one thing, or your CEF. Are there any current plans for altering the way coaching is used or offered to teachers? So is it, again, very much ad hoc where, we have our departmental meetings, we kind of fit it in there? Or actually, you can organize one-to-one meetings and you start to develop these conversations, just professional conversations about it. And that becomes sort of routine and habit. And lastly, it's really to do with, who's going to be in charge of developing these plans? Who is consulted? Who is asked? Who are your key stakeholders? A lot of the times, when we see coaching, when we perceive coaching, we often see it reserved for the executives, for the principals, for the senior leaders, and that really isn't the case anymore. In that coaching is applicable and open to everybody, from the beginning teacher, first year in, up to your 10 years, your 15 years, to your senior leaders, your principals. It's becoming a lot more relevant for every single individual within a school team, and within different departments. So in terms of the planning part, it really has to be that buy-in by everybody to make it successful. So when you review this, there would be three things that you would kind of look to ask yourself or in your leaders in terms of the why and how we get this started. Is the coaching review itself, what has it told you about coaching in your school? So when you carry out these review, what does it tell you about in terms of, does it happen? Do we need to build in time? Is it part of our CPD plan? And if you're happy with that, or do we want to think, actually, you know what, I want some change. I want to change this current situation for the better. If you are keen to develop coaching, who's the best person placed to lead that coaching development? And that's the challenge here, in terms of, this is not a conversation that we're having regarding, right, this is how you go about coaching. There are lots of fantastic courses, introductory courses, companies out there, books out there to get you started. But it's a case of, if you do want to get started, who's going to drive that? Who's going to be the person in charge? And how are they going to be supported moving forward? And lastly, how will you know if you've been successful in developing, a coaching culture? And a lot of that's going to be down to, obviously, the continued conversations you have with individuals, or your team or these people have with individuals, and asking those questions regarding about their confidence, their resilience. It may be that you start to look at the teaching and learning. And one of the challenges that comes with this is a coaching a separate entity to performance management? Coaching is a tool to support performance management. It's not the stick to beat people with, as it were, and sometimes that can be misconstrued, in that obviously performance management is about the goals and looking at performance, and coaching is a tool to help maximize performance. But it can also just be, a transactional conversation that you'd have for a couple of minutes, as you pass people in the hallway. It could be, more of a transformative, longer process that takes place. And the key thing is that as you get through this, you will find that your teachers, if it's successful, one, the teaching and learning within the classroom has benefited. Teachers are confident in terms of addressing their maybe weaknesses, about having open dialogues and setting themselves goals and targets to achieve this. You'll also see an increase in terms of their questioning and active listening, because that's what coaching really is all about. And when you get past this review and you start to develop your staff as coaches, is about developing their skills to be active listeners and to be asking really good, deep questions. And that's what we would see in our impact and effect. So that coaching culture in a school or college builds capacity where teachers work together within professional learning communities to share and practice and learn from each other. Empowered to take risks with their teaching, to share ideas with others and talk about their strengths and what they need to do to continue to improve and grow in their role. And that, as a closing point for this, from me, is why we should be coaching teachers, and why coaching is a really important part of continued professional development. Because it's the teachers who are in control to some extent of their own development. And by doing these things, hopefully, it has a beneficial impact within the teaching and learning, within retention, and for them being the best version of themselves day in, day out for the kids that they are teaching. And that is me. Thank you ever so much for your time, for your patience, for listening and joining me today. I greatly appreciate that. I do believe, but someone correct me if I'm wrong, that there is some time for questions if needed. So go on there. So the question here is, how can schools empower teachers to be more efficient, engaging students' understanding levels? It's kind of a two-pronged question, that one, in terms of students' understanding is to do with their attainment and progress. So in terms of, that's one entity. So in terms of systems that are in place, but in terms of empowering teachers and efficiency, my understanding of something that's efficient is about how you utilize the time to get the most productivity out of it. So in terms of the questions that you ask or the tasks that you do. So I think in terms of, if you want to empower teachers, then there is a level of trust and responsibility. And it's about being able to show to your teachers that you trust or empower and hold them responsible. So the conversations you might have regarding, well, how can you check if your students understand this? That's an open question for a triad or as a one-to-one sense, or in a bigger sense, and say, as a class or an individual, what would you do? And actually have that two-way dialogue, and then challenge teachers and go, right, okay, well, we've got this and it's going to take us this long. Can we do that in 2 minutes? How could you do it in 3 minutes? And it's a lot to do with the questioning. There's two different questions I asked there. I said, could you do it in 2 minutes? It's an easy answer, no. Whereas empowering staff and challenging staff is, how could you do this in 3 minutes? It's not, could you, yes or no, it's how can you? What would you do to get this done in 3 minutes? What would you do to know if this child gets it in your 3 minutes? And a lot of it's to do with empowering staff is then the CPD you have and the questions that you ask, what's and how's. As we said in the coaching component, it's about asking good, deep questions. So for me, empowering my teachers or my team would be asking them the questions, what and how, and then having that hook in terms of gauging students' understanding. And if it's about efficiency, that's about time. So add that time component in to challenge them, to see what ideas they can come up with, and then get them to go. Say, right, go and try it. Be risk takers. There's nothing to lose in trying. And then you come back and you continue the professional dialogue, the professional conversation. So tell me how that went for you. On a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, where would you rank that as? 1 being, the best, 5 being the worst, right? And then you can mix and match. You can continue that and go, well, what made it good? What made it bad? What would you change? What can you do differently? Okay, how are you going to do that? Okay, then you can allow them. So now that you know what you're going to do, go off and have a go. And then we can come back and we have the continued conversation. So the thing with this is it's not a short term, in terms of the coaching or these types of things, they are going to take periods of time. But, those small steps and the continued putting it onto the teachers and asking for them to use their expertise in those questions, that's empowering them because they feel that they've got, control of that situation. All right. Hopefully that answered that question. And that is me. Thank you ever so much for your time, for your patience, for listening and joining me today. I greatly appreciate that.
A session full of energy and enthusiasm. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing the valuable inputs. Thank you so much.